Hey everybody, my name is Chris Whitesides and I work for California State University North Radio Associated Students Outdoor Adventure Program. And I'm super excited to welcome you to our first recorded virtual tour of Death Valley National Park. Despite this being a recording, we'd love to make it as interactive as possible, and I'm going to share some links to do so. The first one is to our Outdoor Adventures virtual programs page, where you can find this video, and hopefully you found this video right there, because the link to our custom Google Earth virtual tour is directly under this video on this page. Honestly, the easiest way to get to all this is just by Googling CSUN Outdoor Adventures and following links to outdoor online or virtual programs. Both will work. That link to Google Earth works best using a Google Chrome browser. Additionally, while we go through this, feel free to have the National Park Services page to Death Valley open for super duper definitive facts, information, and history of the park itself. Additionally, now's a good time to scribble down our email address if you have questions, comments, concerns, or appetite for custom programs too, which we're always down to do. And finally, this program is made possible and virtual tours like this by donations from our community at large, which has been really cool, super appreciated. And thank you. This is 100% a community effort, and we appreciate it. So go ahead and feel free to pause this video right now if you need a little bit more time to access those sites, or look for CSUN Outdoor Adventures virtual programs in the Google Earth link to Death Valley National Park. With all that being said, and before I share my screen, so you can just watch along if you want, my disclaimer that I am not a park ranger, I'm not a scientist, I'm not a geologist. I've done backpacking tours and kind of camp guiding in a whole bunch of different parks and places. So please treat this entire virtual tour as just going out for a walk, hike, virtual fly, tour, hover of the park with a friend, definitely not a ranger. So now that the bar is set nice and low, you've got your Google Earth version of our tour up and available. Let's go ahead and jump straight into it. Perfect. So we are going to be, again, using Google Earth to navigate our tour today, which should take anywhere from 20 to 30 minutes. If you have it open and you're following along on your own, please use this table of contents section as we just click right along through slides 1 through 15. I'll talk a little bit more about navigating once we drop into the park itself. But we're going to start with our big, beautiful overhead shot of the United States, where the National Park Service in protected lands has often been called America's best idea. That idea is not inherently or only an idea created, perpetuated by the United States, but the idea of preserved, protected natural spaces has existed long before the United States by thousands and thousands of indigenous people across thousands and thousands of years of human history. As far back as 2,000 years ago, the Indian government was actually setting up parks and governmentally recognized preserves. But again, well before that as well. What is relatively unique in the US is the idea of natural spaces and monumentalism. Monumentalism usually referring to like a country or a nation's psyche of their historically relevant places, locations, buildings, statues, which the US, as a relatively recent or young nation, didn't have the 4,000 years of Roman aqueducts, colosseums, the Colossus at Rhodes, pyramids. While people definitely existed and called these lands home, we didn't have the super developed structures or traditional ideas of monuments. Therefore, the idea of natural spaces kind of came from indigenous peoples and has been continued to be practiced. So we are going to look specifically at the monument of Death Valley National Park, which resides in the Mojave Desert. The Mojave is one of 4 major deserts in the US, which also include the Chihuahuan Desert stretching into Mexico, the Sonoran Desert, and just north of the Mojave, the Great Basin Desert. The Colorado Desert's absolutely a thing as well, but it's a little smaller and just missed the cut for falling into the 4 major deserts of the United States. Despite these deserts having the name desert, and we usually think of super dry, moist, void of life and biological diversity. That is just not true. Death Valley National Park is a massive swath of land that has super duper low points, super duper high points, tons of different biomes, and is home to massively diverse flora, fauna, and really has an incredible set of human history too, reaching back that we know definitively at least 8,000 years. Throughout this entire region, which the park stretches, and you can see on this little inlet picture, but there were more than 20 tribes of indigenous peoples that called this area home. And they didn't call it Death Valley at the time because this was not a valley or a region of death, but this was a valley of life where they survived and thrived. We're about to drop into the park itself, and these blue dots are where we're going to be focused, which are places that you can, almost all of them, see when you do your tour whenever the park opens back up post-quarantine. One feature that I do want to point out right now is the kind of fingers of mountain ranges that we have going from this Panamint Range right here and the Black Mountains on the eastern side, and then all these low valleys in between, because those were formed by really cool tectonic plate movement, which would strike, slip, and slide against each other to create that uplifting. Horsts are the mountain ranges that can reach up to 11,000 feet of elevation, super duper high. And then grabens, or kind of think of it like gardens, are the lower parts in between. And our view from Dantes View, one of the most famous shots of the entire Death Valley itself, is a really good way of capturing this landscape created by tectonic plate movements. And in my little photo, I've got 4 elements that have created Death Valley National Park: tectonic plate, Earth being the first one. With tectonic plate movement, we also have some geothermal or like molten activity too, where there is some volcanic activity and earthquakes in here, giving us our fire, not to mention that it does get super duper hot in Death Valley. Additionally, water, strange as it may seem, was a major element that created Death Valley National Park. We have geologic kind of evidence from up to 1.7 billion years ago that stuff was going on, but it's not until about 500 million years ago that we get more definitive evidence that Death Valley was once a warm, shallow sea. Yep, like an ocean. It was a big old body of water that was at points recorded 600 feet deep, which is crazy to think about. The hottest, driest place on Earth was once a warm, shallow sea. Since then, it's obviously evaporated a little bit, but there have been periods where the valley itself has refilled with water, including as recently as 150,000 years ago and 50,000 years ago, at the beginning and end stages of ice ages, when glacial melt from the Sierra Nevada, way the heck over here, flooded and would fill up Death Valley again. If you don't believe me, I'm going to try and prove it right now by dropping in from Dantes View into Devil's Golf Course. Devil's Golf Course at the floor of the valley might be our best evidence that this is a catch or a drainage for water throughout history, because all these rock formations that you see are actually salt. So during those periods when it was a shallow sea or with water runoff from glaciers, there would be periods of mass evaporation, creating the valley that we see today, but leaving behind resources, sediment that would pool in this low spot. Devil's Golf Course being this super duper salty, sharp, spiky place where only the devil himself would play golf. And despite the name, or actually because of the name, there are always a couple tourists per year that see Devil's Golf Course on a brochure. I think it's an actual golf course because it is relatively close to some of the more developed areas of Death Valley. And they do bring their clubs to try and play. And when they get there, they are just a little bit disappointed. Devil's Golf Course is one of the most unique spots in the park, and really cool to go and check out and to see thousands, if not millions of years of history kind of at the current moment. Let's go ahead and continue moving on to probably the most famous spot in all of Death Valley, just a couple miles south of Devil's Golf Course into Badwater Basin, the lowest point in the United States, and I believe North America. Check me on the MPS website. Badwater Basin sits at negative 282 feet below sea level. So if you're chilling at the beach at Santa Monica, picture 282 feet below you, and that's where you'd be standing if you were at Badwater Basin. Right now, I'm going to hit the pause button, actually, and talk through using Google Earth, because this is a good spot to take it all in. You can go ahead and click and drag to move this camera around wherever you want to look at. If you think you see something interesting, like this dude in the salmon shirt, you can use the plus or the minus arrows to zoom in and see what a nice smile he has. If you're done with him, you can zoom out. And if you accidentally zoom out too far, that's okay, not the end of the world. We're going to use this little stick figure to pick ourselves up and drop. Let's try a different location and cross our fingers. See if it was as good as that other one with the cloud cover. But you will drop in, oh my gosh, might have been even better, and see just even more cool 360 shots. Again, Badwater Basin is famous for being 282 feet below sea level, of real drainage for other salts and minerals in the area. And Badwater Basin is also a good point to point out that Death Valley reaches crazy highs because this low point plus two mountain ranges really bounces the heat off each other and captures it inside that valley. The highest recorded temperature in Death Valley was in 1913, a little while ago, where the park reached 134 degrees Fahrenheit. 134 degrees. Crazy hot, crazy low. It is truly a land in an area of extremes. While we don't have to worry about it now, a good point to make right now is talking about wearing sunscreen when you do go visit the park after this whole COVID nonsense clears up. When you do wear sunscreen, make sure you're wearing it with UVA and UVB protection. UVB being that 134-degree heat on your skin that'll burn, make it uncomfortable, and look red. UVA rays are the ones that get down into your skin, cause premature aging, wrinkles, and can lead to things like skin cancer. Good thing we don't have to worry about that for the rest of our tour. Let's go ahead and keep on jumping around in our land of extremes. Following that theme, we rise up from the lowest point in the park to the highest at Telescope Peak, which sits at 11,000 something feet above sea level. Again, it's almost 11,000 foot difference. And you can see we're in a totally different biome where there's not salt on the ground, but snow. There's also all sorts of different flora, fauna going on around here. And you can see there's a lot more, there's just a lot more plants. And you can even see there's a lot more, not on this side, but on this western side, we see all this stuff going on. And that's because of a phenomena called orographic precipitation. When clouds like these way over in the west start working their way towards Death Valley, they're forced to go up over mountain ranges. When those clouds get higher, they drop their rain on the westward, or in this case, kind of the more ocean side of these mountain ranges, leaving subsequently less and less rain as they move east. This phenomena of a rain shadow just means that places like Death Valley exist in that rain shadow and get even less water than their western counterparts. So orographic precipitation is our word of the week, and maybe also exeric is a cool word, which just means super duper dry. Exeric being the result of orographic precipitation. So from that extreme peak, and extremely cold too. The whole park gets cold, but I think I've been the coldest I've ever been backpacking around Telescope Peak. Let's go ahead and continue on. We've said it gets super hot, it's super salty, it's either super high, super dry. There shouldn't be a lot of life, right? Let alone a little stream at the bottom of Death Valley in the valley itself. But here we are with a natural spring flowing up at Salt Creek Interpretive Trail, which is home to a really cool extreme fish, which is the pupfish, named for its seemingly playful behavior, where it looks like it's wrestling and tussling with the other fish. They look like little puppies. They're actually crazy territorial males preparing for mating. So they look like they're playing, but they're actually fiercely fighting. But the name pupfish has stuck, and these guys are really, really tiny. I think all of an inch big, super playful, and a decent amount of them in here. The pupfish is a cool extreme fish because it's had to adapt to the extremes, and it has existed in this region for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, if not millions. I bet. Check me on the MVS website again. But the pupfish has gone from being able to live in fresh water and then has adapted to now being able to live in super duper saline or super salty water. An endangered species and a really cool example of adaptations and evolutions to help species exist in extreme locations. I don't think there were any pupfish on here, but feel free to play with the map and see if you can spot some wrestling around in the water. And now we've got some usable water, despite it being a little bit salty on the valley floor. That just means that we get up to elevation or in some of these other mountain ranges, we're going to find a little bit more. And there are a surprising amount of natural springs throughout the park, like this one, Darwin Falls, which is just outside of the Death Valley floor. Darwin Falls creates riparian areas, which are kind of the surrounding areas to water, where it does look green and lush, and we have a ton of plants and animals that can then exist in this space due to these natural springs, which is water coming up from underground and feeding out of these mountain ranges. So not only a little bit helpful with some rainfall, but mostly from underground sources. Springs like this with clean, fresh water throughout the park made it possible for, number one, those indigenous tribes to exist, live, thrive, and call this area home, but also made it inhabitable as settlers kept coming west and kind of manifest destiny and finding new places to call home. One such example of that is the Harmony Borax Works, which was an enterprise which was mining or taking borax, a chemical found in like cleaning products, cosmetics. It's an antifungal that exists in fiberglasses. A super weird one. But again, because Death Valley was such a drainage for things and sediment to accumulate, there's a lot of weird stuff on the ground, including borax. The Harmony Borax Works brought in folks to mine it and transport that borax in these kind of covered wagon style, 161 miles to the town of Mojave, directly west, so across a couple different mountain ranges, where it was then put on a railroad. Ooh, that was a tough one. Railroad, and taken to places like Los Angeles, San Francisco, and distributed from there. So we're in the valley floor. There's folks mining, harvesting this borax, putting it in here, and 20 mule teams, which were actually just 18 mules and 2 horses, would then take this 161 miles, about 17 miles a day, all the way to the town of Mojave, stopping at springs like Darwin Falls along the way. So despite it being 134 degrees, people are crazy. They would still make endeavors like this function. It is no longer a working borax mine, but is a historical place for you to visit, which also includes some of the buildings that they had. Super interesting. Let's go ahead and keep on rolling through as we go to slide 11 of 15, taking us back into the mountain range to see another developed site. Here we are at Panamint City in that Panamint Range just below Telescope Peak, which is somewhere up in here. But Panamint City, as early in the mid 1800s, was a relatively large mining town where prospectors mined for silver and copper. Doesn't look like much of a town now, but there were actually 2,000 human beings that called this location home, which is crazy to think about, because right now you have to backpack like 8 miles up waterfalls and these really steep slot canyons to kind of get in here. But there was a paved road. There were 2,000 people coming up and down the mountain. There were saloons. I was going to say salons. There might have been salons to do your hair. There were saloons. There were houses. There were gambling centers. There was red light districts. It was kind of your prototypical Western mining town, a town of lawlessness. Due to some flash flooding in the area, again, helped by orographic precipitation, the town was washed out relatively recently, I think in the later 1800s, but really only existed and thrived for a handful of years before being washed out by floods. Again, a massive flood in the late 1900s really kind of sealed the fate and left this as a ghost town. One of the coolest backpacking trips you can take on if you're not afraid of running into rattlesnakes. There's mines all up in here. There's all sorts of cool stuff to poke around and explore in Panamint City. Let's continue on. All right, if we're not mining for borax anymore, if we're not mining for copper and silver, it doesn't seem like a lot of utility or use for an inhospitable place like this. But towns like Furnace Creek and establishments like the hotel at Scotty's Castle have really turned Death Valley into a tourist attraction where people can appreciate the kind of natural splendor and uniqueness of this almost Martian or alien landscape. If it looks like an alien landscape, you might have seen it and recognized it from some of the Star Wars movies that were filmed here while filming was still permitted in the area. Episode 4, A New Hope, where Luke meets Old Ben, and Jabba's Palace in episode, whatever that is, episode 6, were all filmed in Death Valley National Park at places like, not exactly at Zabriskie Point, but in this area. So you can kind of imagine R2 running away from Jawas through some of these canyons, which is super cool. But now Zabriskie Point is one of the most famous spots that attracts tourists to appreciate this landscape. Let's continue on as we go to another popular tourist destination and just another example of the diversity and just kind of surreal weirdness of Death Valley that you find around every corner, such as Artist's Palette, a place where minerals and the soil and rock have oxidized to create these really cool colors. Artist's Palette is a drive that you can take where these kind of painted mountains run all along the eastern side and present a really good photo opportunity. Super cool spot in Artist Valley. And again, with the valley itself just right there. So all these places are accessible by car for you to see, except Panamint City and Telescope Peak, which you got to sling a backpack on to get to. Let's go ahead and continue on in the theme of weirdness to what I think is the strangest place in Death Valley, which is absolutely saying something, which is the racetrack. On this one, make sure you don't zoom out too far because it took me a really long time to find a Google shot of this racing rock, which there are a handful. And for the longest time, people did not know how, but these rocks actually moved across the valley floor. Some as big as 700 pounds were racing. By racing, we mean moving inconsistently, millimeters, inches a year, a decade, without regularity, and no one really knew why, but it was still cool to see. So you can see a track of this one, and I don't even know where it disappears to. But super duper recent. I honestly think it was 2014. I got to check the paper. 2014, scientists set up and they were like, we're going to figure this out. They set up for what they were expecting to be the most boring experiment in human history, watching these rocks that, again, there was no rhyme or reason as to when, how far, or what made these things move. Setting up cameras, setting up shop out here, they finally kind of discovered it was this really sweet spot or confluence of 100 different elements, which would allow these rocks or these stones to sail, which they've also been called. So how it happened, or how they're now theorizing that it happens, is this low spot will sometimes get filled up with rainwater. That rainwater will make the ground nice, soft, and wet, but still not enough for a rock to move or slide downhill. So we've got that it's wet, Now it gets super duper freezing cold and that water actually freezes so that it's thick enough and strong enough not to break, but also thin enough to float on top of the water. We've got water, we've got ice. Now we add a little bit of wind into the mix, and the wind would actually come from the back of the tracks and push that ice into the rock, which then again was thick enough so the ice didn't shatter. The mud beneath the rock in front of it was now reduced friction. So these sailing stones were actually pushed by wind, ice, on top of a almost frictionless surface underneath to move incrementally, which then explained why this wasn't a natural phenomena that occurred, or excuse me, it was a natural phenomenon, but didn't occur regularly. Really cool. This is one of the harder spots to get to in the park, as you need a vehicle with four-wheel drive, and it is decently far away from everything else too. But honestly, one of the coolest, most surreal spots, and definitely worth checking out with four-wheel drive, extra water, extra gas. We're going to go ahead and hop on to our very last stop and our last element that we hadn't talked much about, but we know that wind sails those stones, and we also know that wind creates the mesquite sand dunes. Right smack dab center in the valley as well, wind will push sediment and sand up one side, the windward side of these dunes, creating a nice slope that you can kind of see up. And the leeward or leeward side of these slopes is relatively steep on the other side. These pictures, these 360 ones, just don't do it justice, as these are crazy steep and crazy high up. You can kind of see with how small these bushes are down there, but it makes for an absolutely incredible spot to go sand sledding. And if you've never gone, I highly recommend it. Some pro tips: cardboard does not work. The super cheap, like styrofoam boogie boards from Walmart, do not work. You have to have a hard plastic, like a saucer that you'd go snow sledding in, and you can get cooking down the side of these mountains, going super duper fast. This is a spot definitely not to visit in the dead of summer, as we might see temperatures of 134. But in the winter, in really early spring, you can sneak out and make the big hike because the parking lot is way the heck over here as well. So we covered a massive amount of ground in a relatively massive park, from human history at 11,000 feet to sand dunes to weird moving rocks to even weirder kind of scaly slot canyons, because Death Valley is just that. It is a weird, surreal place, but definitely a place worth checking out. With all that being said, Death Valley is currently closed due to the COVID crisis. Please check on the NPS website to figure out if, when, and how national parks will open up in a safe manner. That's all I have for you. Good thing you copied down our links. Here's the links one more time. If you have questions about the park, like rattlesnakes, coyotes, what kind of plants can actually survive in there, when's the best time to visit, what are some campgrounds, I'd be more than happy to share some of that information. Go ahead and just shoot us an email, or you can find us on Facebook. Seaside Outdoor Adventures, pretty easy to do. Click around some of our other virtual tours that are up there, and be sure to check back for live virtual tours, where we'll have a question and answer and a chat feature going on. And then finally, one more call. Again, these programs are made possible to super generous donations from our community that we appreciate, and we want to keep sharing with you all. Thank you for stopping by and spending a little time, and we look forward to seeing you virtually and eventually in these parks. Have a good day.